April 4th, 1968. As the sun began to set over Memphis, Tennessee, a single gunshot echoed across the courtyard of the Lorraine Motel. Within seconds, one of the most influential leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement lay critically wounded on the second-floor balcony outside his room. Millions around the world would soon hear the devastating news. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. Authorities quickly identified a suspect, and within weeks, an arrest was made. But more than half a century later, questions about the investigation, the evidence, and whether one man acted alone continue to be discussed by historians, researchers, and members of King's own family. This is the story of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final days, the investigation that followed, and the questions that still surround one of the most significant assassinations in American history. By 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. had become the face of the struggle for civil rights in the United States. His leadership during the Montgomery bus boycott, the Birmingham campaign, and the March on Washington had inspired millions and helped bring about major legislative changes. But success had come at a price. King received frequent death threats. He was criticized by segregationists, monitored by the FBI, and increasingly outspoken about poverty and the Vietnam War. In the spring of 1968, his attention turned to Memphis, Tennessee. There, more than 1,000 sanitation workers, most of them black, were on strike after years of poor pay, unsafe working conditions, and unequal treatment.
But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for...
King believed their fight was about more than wages. It was about dignity and justice. He traveled to Memphis to support the workers and to lead a peaceful demonstration. He had no way of knowing that it would be his final journey. On April 4th, King spent much of the day meeting with colleagues at the Lorraine Motel. That evening, he prepared to leave for dinner at the home of a local minister. Just after 6 p.m., King stepped onto the balcony outside room 306. Friends gathered below joked with him as they prepared to leave. Then at approximately 6:01 p.m., a single rifle shot rang out. The bullet struck King in the face and neck, causing catastrophic injuries. Those nearby immediately rushed to his aid, while others pointed toward a nearby boarding house, believing the shot had come from there. King was transported to St. Joseph's Hospital, where doctors worked desperately to save his life. Despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead later that evening. He was 39 years old. The news spread rapidly across the United States, triggering grief, anger, and unrest in many cities. For millions, it marked the loss of one of the most influential voices for equality and nonviolent protest.
But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
The shot that killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lasted only a fraction of a second, but the investigation it triggered would span decades. Within moments of the shooting, witnesses pointed toward a nearby rooming house across from the Lorraine Motel. Several people believed they had heard the gunshot come from that direction. Police officers rushed to secure the area. Near the entrance of the building, investigators discovered a bundle of items that had apparently been abandoned in haste. Inside were a rifle, a pair of binoculars, and other personal belongings. The rifle, a Remington Model 760 Game Master chambered in .30-06 Springfield, immediately became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Investigators carefully examined the weapon, searching for fingerprints and other forensic clues. Among the evidence recovered were fingerprints linked to a man named James Earl Ray, a 40-year-old escaped convict who had fled a Missouri prison nearly a year earlier. As detectives began tracing Ray's movements, a clearer picture emerged. Using aliases and moving frequently from city to city, Ray had traveled across the United States in the weeks leading up to the assassination. Records showed that he had purchased the rifle under a false name and rented a room in the boarding house overlooking the Lorraine Motel. Authorities now believed they had identified their prime suspect, but James Earl Ray was already gone. The search quickly expanded beyond the borders of the United States. Law enforcement agencies across Europe and North America were alerted. Ray had become one of the world's most wanted fugitives. For more than 2 months, investigators followed a trail of passports, false identities, and international travel. Then on June 8, 1968, the manhunt came to an end. At Heathrow Airport in London, immigration officials stopped a traveler attempting to board a flight. The passenger was James Earl Ray.
Rights. One, you have the right to remain silent. Two, anything you say is against you in the court of law. Number three, you have the right to have a lawyer. You have a choice of court of law. To talk to your lawyer before answering any questions. You have him with you during questions.
He was arrested without incident and later extradited to the United States to face charges for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Man serving time for the death of his father, Dr. Martin Luther King.
Long anticipated visit.
The youngest son wanted to look into the eyes of a terminally ill James Earl Ray and ask one question in particular.
Did you kill my father?
No, I didn't know.
And then King offered this.
I believe you, and my family believes you, and we are going to do everything in our power to try and make sure that justice will prevail.
Their meeting.
In March 1969, rather than face a trial that could have resulted in the death penalty, James Earl Ray entered a guilty plea. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison. For many Americans, the case appeared to be over. The assassin had been identified. The evidence had been presented. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But only 3 days later, Ray changed his position. He asked to withdraw his guilty plea. From that moment forward, the case entered a new and far more controversial chapter. Ray claimed he had not acted alone. He insisted he had been manipulated by a mysterious figure known only as Raoul. His new claims would fuel decades of speculation, investigations, books, and documentaries. Whether those claims were true or simply an attempt to escape responsibility would become one of the most debated aspects of the case. Investigators searched for evidence supporting this claim, but never found conclusive proof that Raoul existed or that Ray had been directed by a broader conspiracy. Still, the questions did not disappear. Over the years, researchers, journalists, and some members of Dr. King's family raised concerns about aspects of the investigation. They questioned whether every lead had been fully explored and whether Ray had truly acted alone. In 1978, the U.S. House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the case. After reviewing years of evidence, the committee concluded that James Earl Ray fired the fatal shot. However, it also stated that there was a possibility of a conspiracy based on limited evidence, while emphasizing that it could not identify any additional participants or prove a larger plot. More than 20 years later, in 1999, the King family brought a civil lawsuit against a Memphis restaurant owner, alleging that others had been involved in the assassination. A civil jury found in favor of the King family. However, this was not a criminal trial, and the verdict did not overturn James Earl Ray's conviction or establish criminal responsibility for anyone else. In 2000, the United States Department of Justice conducted another review of the available evidence. After examining witness statements, investigative records, and previous claims, it concluded that there was no reliable evidence proving a conspiracy beyond James Earl Ray. To this day, opinions remain divided. Some believe the official investigation reached the correct conclusion. Others believe important questions remain unanswered. What everyone agrees on is that the assassination changed history forever.
I have a dream this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.